What do you want to call me?
All right, cool. Well, we're live now. So I'll say welcome to everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'm thrilled to be having a conversation here with Dr. Dana Suskind, who is a pediatric surgeon and who is the author of the new book, Parent Nation, Unlocking Every Child's Potential and Fulfilling Society's Promise. So this is going to be just a chat, just having some good conversation, and we hope that you all will join us as well. I will say that I also want to thank up top Joe Waters and Capita for hosting this, for hosting my newsletter. The Parents Aren't All Right, and make sure you're subscribed to that. I hope you'll lots of time for audience questions and conversation here. This is our first time using the StreamYard platform. We're a little off our Zoom comfort zone here, so I'll beg that your all's forgiveness if we are having technical issues to work through it. But hopefully it's pretty straightforward. So, Dana, I wanted to just start off, if you could just briefly, summarize, give us the recap, give us the pitch, like, Parent Nation, the book, what's the main idea, just tell us, give us the summary.
So, Parent Nation really follows my first book, which looked at the neuroscience at the individual level, what it takes to allow all children to thrive and all parents to be supported. Parent Nation really zooms out and asks, okay, if we know all of this to be true, if we know what children need to thrive, what does a society look like that truly puts children and their healthy development and the support of parents at the center? And so the book is told through powerful family stories and neuroscience as a framework, but really as a pathway forward for society.
That's great and incredibly needed, I think, at this moment, especially. I'm curious, in my newsletter, I talk a lot about this idea of kind of parent power, right? Like the parents actually, surprisingly, aren't a broadly organized force, in America. I'm curious, like, what's your sort of diagnosis? Let's first start there. Like, why do you think that's the case, that parents aren't particularly organized?
Yeah. And just so as you know, that's really what aligns us so closely. Why is it? It is a very uniquely American sort of stance that having children, I think it's because of this idea of American individualism, this idea that, you have to be tough and independent and rugged and go it alone, that has seeped into this idea that parenting is a completely individual endeavor. It's sort of like getting a puppy. You want a puppy, you take care of it, it's all on you, go forth. And so not only have we then structured society in that way with little to no supports, especially in the early years, and probably our entire audience knows this so well, but we have sort of internalized this idea, especially mothers, but everyone, that this should be all on us. Many of the parents that I spoke to talked about feeling like they were failing in all parts of their lives, rather than saying, why is society failing me so I can't do the job that I'm supposed to be doing? So that's my medical diagnosis, which gives us a path forward, though, right?
Yeah. So continue on that thought. So what's the path forward then? That's the diagnosis. What's the prescription?
No, exactly. I mean, because everybody, when they talked to me, they're like, okay, what do we do next? And look, I think everyone in the audience knows what needs to happen, but there are a few sort of intermediate steps that I think we're beginning, especially because of this time of COVID. One is this elevation of expectations. The fact that parents need to start seeing their role as, they've always seen their role as important, but seeing their role also as guardians, not only of their children's healthy development, but guardians of society's future. Mm-hmm. And to start seeing society as and having an important role in supporting them in this incredibly important endeavor. So number one, elevating their expectations. But I think there's another important point that, going back to this idea of parent power, that we haven't formed this idea of a collective identity. We look at, I'm a parent, you're a parent. We talk about, the struggles and the joys of parenting, but rarely do we look at another parent and say, you're an ally. Not only are you suffering with the same sleepless nights and trying to find childcare, but we want the same things, and we can be allies and go it together. Because let's face it, the powers that be, they are there to support us, and we need to come together. So those two things, elevating expectations and building collective identity, I think are key factors in moving us forward.
I won't surprise you to learn I completely agree with that. It's interesting, I have done a bit of research into this question in particular, like how parents like engage around something like climate change. And what's really interesting is when you get outside of even something like care or education into these other places, parents actually, it seems to be, are not engaging with these topics as parents first. There are other identities that are sort of the initial lens, right? So they're thinking about it through their sort of partisan ideological identity, or they're thinking about it and their identity with like, their geographic identity. They're not necessarily saying like, oh, like I need to think about this as a parent first, actually. And so, you end up seeing sort of what to me seems like odd results, like, parents not actually displaying particular concern over around like climate change versus non-parents, or you'll sometimes see parents not actually like showing up and supporting like childcare policies as much as you would expect that they would, just by dint of being parents. So I think we see this, what you're talking about, play out very much in practice. And I'm curious, when you think about building that sense of sort of joint identity, like what did your research and have you found like are the opportunities to do that? How do we sort of build that connectivity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's not $1 million question, but I think at some level, I spoke like you. I have spent, my research career trying to understand at a deeper level how beliefs map into what we do. But I've also talked to, I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours talking to parents across the entire sort of all sides of the aisle, from religious to education, from race. And at the end of the day, what's very interesting is they all, as you might imagine, they all want the same thing for their children. They want the same thing for their future. We get sort of confused and wrapped up in, sort of these ideologies that really have little to do with what we want. And I think really centering on this idea of what connects us as parents, our love for children. We all believe in the opportunity that all children should have, and sort of anchoring on that and what we all sort of need. And I think that's a huge way of moving us forward. It's funny. I know we'll talk about this later, but in some of the work that we're doing on the ground, we're having families go through something called this big shift tool, right? Where they're sort of looking at all the daily sort of activities of being a parent in this real world. And we're having them go through how much of the stuff is on their shoulders, and and they see it visually. And then we ask them, okay, in your ideal world, what part would be taken care of by you? Obviously, parenting is always taken care of by the parent, but what part is taken by community, family, society, policy? And what's very interesting is that across the spectrum, it's always initially lopsided. It's all on the individual. But then when you have them go through this sort of intellectual, exercise, no matter what their background is, it becomes much more equal. I think that fundamentally we all realize that it doesn't just take a village, it takes a nation to raise a child, and we all want it. So I think that's getting people to go through those exercises, finding our commonality rather than looking for our division, is what I believe needs to be our steps forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to also say here for those who are watching, so if you put any comments on the YouTube channel, like they will pop up for us and we'll be able to see them. And so if you have questions, if you have thoughts, please feel free to put those in, and we'll see them and we can use those a little bit later on. No, I mean, I think that what you're talking about there makes total sense. This idea of how do we help people see and even conceive of a different world, where it's not just the individual responsibility. I'll say, I sometimes have these conversations around childcare, which is sort of my obviously main field, where people be like, well, why it's not government's job to help with childcare, like that should be the parents' job. And that's sort of the initial reaction. Then you take them through a few steps. It's like, okay, well, like, why do we have a public education system, right? Like there are certain parts of society where really very few people question that the government and society writ large, taxpayers, even those who don't have kids, should be contributing. There should be some balance between the parental prerogative and the society's role. But then there seems it's very hard to apply that elsewhere to these other kind of parts of the sort of day-to-day parenting life. So what you're saying makes sense of having people pause and actually ask these questions, which are, seems to me, sort of philosophical on some level of like, what is the proper role of the state and the proper role of the parent, as it comes to helping to support and raise children. So that makes a ton of sense. I think as we sort of pivot, I think to talk pretty soon about more practical steps here. This idea of putting sort of like a pro-family frame in place, right? Like narrative change is, I think, what you're describing. And so, I'm curious, where have you seen, that work? Where have you sort of seen those those narratives start to shift? Are there any bright spots we can look at?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so many potential ones, but I always like to bring up the AARP and the elderly, right? And we can talk about how the AARP shifted what it is to be elderly in this country. But I think another powerful thing that they brought was a narrative shift around the elderly. So back in the 40s, 30s, anytime before the 60s, the elderly were actually the poorest segment of the population. They were considered, they didn't have much to contribute to society any longer, and they were sort of left by the wayside. And through the AARP and sort of this idea, actually the motto of the AARP was to serve, not be served. And, it was through marketing and through all of the things that we don't realize need to happen, but need to happen to have narrative shifts. They have really shifted what it means in the view of what it is to be elderly now. So now, you think of, the elderly as, vibrant, contributing tremendously, not only having contributed to society, long ago, but still contributing to society. And they still do. It's a very important frame. But in the same way, I think we need to reframe parents in this country and parenting. I think we're starting to wake up that none of us go it alone, right?
Yeah.
But I think we need to elevate the parents to this, really important level. We say children are the future, but parents are the ones who are building that future.
And voting for that future.
And voting for that future. Yeah, children do not vote. That is for sure. But their parents do. And, if you could change that frame of how, not just how society sees them, but how they see themselves, honestly, I think you would really shift, the supports that we have. That we are deserving of these things, that it's necessary. But I want to add one more thing that people don't often know. So not only do you need narrative shifts, but you need those shifts not to go back, right? It is very easy for the powers that be, whether it be for, pure economics, we don't want to spend it, or for other underlying reasons, that they want to shift the frame to undeserving people. And, we think that once you get a shift in the frame that it stays. But actually, in the 1980s, the elderly, because the AARP was so successful in protecting them and pushing forward their interests, there started being this discussion in the literature about the greedy geezers and the elderly being undeserving. And you don't hear that anymore. It didn't stick. Why? Because the AARP wouldn't allow it to stick. Right? And I think that we think of these things as, they all happen organically. No, these things don't happen organically. Yeah. And so that's why I think you and I and many people are believing that we need a larger organization that are supporting the rights of children and families.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and I actually didn't know that about the greedy geezers. Probably there's a reason why I didn't know that. What you're saying, it reminds me, if I could say one other book. Maxine Eichner wrote this book, The Free Market Family, and she talks about how actually, we think very often it's just always been this way, that we've, always sort of had this super individualistic sense of family. But actually, that was a fairly deliberate choice that was made and pushed by certain interest groups in sort of the 60s and 70s. And that prior to that, it was very different. And so, this idea, you're absolutely right. Like, these things don't tend to happen by random chance. There's often actors behind them for good or for ill. So that makes a lot of sense. And actually, I said we have one question come in, so I'm actually going to slot into this part of the conversation. So I'll ask it now. So Kevin asks about, what are the main policy pillars being used to reinforce that rugged individualist framing for or on parents, as opposed to pathways for a more connected, supportive model? So, what policies do you see that are kind of continuing to drive a wedge between parents and force us into our sort of islands?
I have to think about it. I don't usually think about it as existing policies. There are no existing policies, but I think it's how you frame the policies that can be used as wedges, and they're often false. So, I mean, let's say childcare, right?
Yeah.
Childcare and the question of, women staying home, and is this shifting?
Came to my mind too.
What did you say?
That's exactly what came to mind for me as well.
Yeah. And but what's really interesting, and I look, in this book, this is not a prescription for how to parent. I always say there are many ways to parent a child and for them to be successful. There's only one way to build a brain, and it's through nurturing high quality interaction with parent, caregiver, etc. But there are many ways to raise a child. But I think that what often happens with these policies is that the frame around them are, taken up by different sides and mutated in many different ways. And I'll talk historically at this point. We all know about the Comprehensive Child Development Act, right? That almost could have, we could be at a very different place in this world. I don't know, but I like to imagine that we could have. And that act, very interestingly, wasn't just about childcare, right, and supporting working parents, but there was provisions for supporting stay-at-home families, but or stay-at-home mothers at that time. But there was a deliberate decision not, to just focus on, what was happening in the workplace, as opposed to seeing that, look, this was comprehensive. And, I think that it's not so much the policies, but the people around them and the narratives that they're trying to spew out that drive wedges. And there will always be that way. And that's, again, why we need, a large lobbying group. And it's just not just political, but advocating on behalf of what all families need. Because I'll tell you, I made another deliberate decision in interviewing and including the voices of parents from all different backgrounds. Obviously, I work I'm at the University of Chicago. I work with families on the South Side, incredible families. They are inspiring me every day. But I started writing this during the time of COVID and started seeing, wow, what we were all seeing. This is, a universal abdication of society's role in supporting parents. And so I interviewed parents from different, religious backgrounds, race, ethnicities, political ideologies. And when you remove the politics, we all want the same thing. So I think the only way is to anchor on what we all want, as opposed to around it, because people get, sidetracked.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's a good pivot point. And please keep those comments and questions coming, and I'll say too to that, this is interesting thing that happens when you sort of when society posits forward this idea that it's, individual families' responsibility to deal with their own kind of family unit, right? You're responsible for figuring out childcare. You're responsible for figuring out, elder care, all of these things. That then I think what happens, and I know there's been some research on this, particularly in the sort of elder care space, is it becomes transgressive then to say, I need help. It becomes actually, in a sense, you're like sort of admitting some failing, like I can't, and that can therefore kind of, there's this tension of like, we know on the one hand this isn't working, but on the other hand, like if I advocate for, public support of this, like what am I saying about my own, ability to provide for my own family? And I think that's a very insidious sort of tension that gets in when you do have people who are saying, like, it's wrong for a mother to be working, and it's wrong to need public assistance, right? All of these things, I think, can, to that point, like, make it feel more and more individualistic, as opposed to, like you're saying, like, let's actually ground in what unites us. And so I think, to that point, like, let's talk about, like, how would we do that? I know you've been piloting some really interesting and writing about some really interesting efforts that are out there. So talk to us about some specific partnerships that you've been working on.
Well, and really, I want to emphasize at the very beginning, there are so many incredible organizations out there working towards this larger idea, bringing together the power of parent voice. I mean, it's just phenomenal. I talked a little bit about them in the book. Obviously, it could have been the entire book, but across the country, there are organizations everywhere working towards this larger goal. What was very interesting is that everything is siloed, so it feels like lots of voices, like rain, as opposed to like one big thunder shower. And so what are we doing? This book started just as a continuation related to my first book. Like, what could society look like? But we all know, books and their ideas, they can stay inside the book or get out a little bit, but they don't really manifest the change that you want. And I always joke that I'm a surgeon. I want to see that change. And so one of the really neat things, I have a partner, Yoli Flores, who's leading this effort we call Parent Villages, where we've developed, or she's developed with parents across the country, with organizations across the country, this 4-part curriculum, if you will, that takes groups of parents through sort of this change of elevation of expectation. We call it the 3 Fs: finding community, forging collective identity, and fighting for change. But what it is really sort of a mind shift of saying, okay, I am the most important person in my child's life, but like everyone, it takes the village, it takes the nation, it takes them through this process of coming together and figuring out the change that they want to see in their community. And we're doing this effort in partnership with all of these different groups. We're not leading the effort as much as providing this curriculum. So, later today, we have something with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, an incredible organization. But we've met with, many organizations across the country. You see, when you get 54, your mind goes blank for all the names. I will get you the names. Actually, we'll put them on. So that is an incredibly exciting effort. But, I really want to emphasize that one of my hopes related to the book and everything that we're doing, and I know you, Elliot, have, reached out beyond the early childhood folks, is that, we all know this. Everyone in this area has been working for so long and so effectively towards this end, right? I mean, and we thought things were going to change. Let's face it. A year and a half ago, I actually was like, oh, wow, I don't actually even need to write this book.
Yeah, it's painful. I know. No. You looked so bright there for a moment.
Well, I mean, it was, I always say we jinxed it. But it felt, but we are able to have sweeping change. I really, really believe that. But really, we need to get it out of our echo chamber even more. And I know you work so effectively across the Care Can't Wait. Yeah. We need to get it into the, world of business. I mean, in the book, but what we need to do is, we need to leverage the powerful role of healthcare. We need to leverage the powerful role of business. And I think the business is going to be an incredible partner in this. Why? Because not only is it good for their bottom line, but let's face it, they're suffering too with, so many women leaving the workforce. And obviously the policy play. So I think that it's, one of those efforts that is not, we need a parent lobbying group, but we also need all parts of society on board towards building this larger change that needs to happen.
I think that's so right. I've been long impressed. So in Multnomah County, Oregon, which is Portland, they'd had this big universal pre-K measure last year. But what I thought was particularly special about it was when they were organizing it, they got like every possible sort of interest group together. So they had like yoga teachers, they had like, the hairdressers, right? They had like everyone you could think of, right? The frisbee players. You get every association and say like, look, like whether you may not think that you're actually a stakeholder around childcare, but you actually are, and there's an angle to this, and different things are going to resonate for different people. There are different arguments, but ultimately, like, yeah, we need to care about this. And so, and everyone rallied and it got passed. And I think what you're talking about is right. Like we have to in some ways extend beyond, as you say, the echo chamber, beyond our own sort of constituencies and broaden them. So I couldn't agree more.
I read your newsletter this morning and about the day without daycare, which I think is awesome.
Exactly, yeah.
I think we should think even broader. How about a day without educated children, and all doctors, teachers, lawyers, your baristas, everybody stops working, because I think at the end of the day, we forget that we are all the beneficiaries of people who have been raised well by children.
That's right. I was saying on Twitter over the weekend, the most frustrating line I ever hear is, well, people shouldn't have kids if they can't afford them. And I'm like, really? Have you thought like for like 5 seconds about what comes after that? Like the next couple of sentences of that sort of line of logic?
Maybe that's the tagline. You don't pay for childcare, you can't come see me, because my mom had to spend a lot,
right.
a lot of time raising me. Yeah, no, it's we forget. And look, I mean, because of it, we've got this fertility crisis that we're looking down the barrel. So
yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And again, as we sort of round the half hour, please make sure any comments, any questions, please put those in. We'll have plenty of time for those near the end. Dana, I think you have a video for us you want to show, or
I wanted to show, just so, as I mentioned, as part of this book, we are doing, we have an air and a ground game. And I want to really emphasize, this is not a product. All proceeds go back to this larger effort that we're all working towards. So we have this ground game that we're building. We've got this amazing curriculum. If you go to the parentnation.org website, it's going to be free and downloadable, that everybody can use. Wait 1 second. Let me just tell. Not only there'll be free downloadable curriculum. Would love to partner with everyone and anyone. And so, can you see what I have on?
Yes, I see the parents lived reality slide right now.
Okay, yeah. So I want to show you just a few things that we've created. So as mentioned, Yoli is doing these amazing villages with groups across the country. We've had dad groups, we have had obviously mom groups, grandparents, LGBT. We've got people without children, all sort of reimagining what the society can look like. And I just wanted to show you physically when they do the big shift tool. Basically, you can see this is balance with individual and institution. I'm not sure if you can see, and you can see the parents live reality. Often everything is right on their shoulders. And then we have them reimagine. Oops. Can you see that now?
Yep, the ideal society. Yeah, wow, it's a big change.
What happens when they say, okay, well, you know what? Helping sort of support the cost of childcare or paid leave, maybe the institutions should do a little bit more helping. And you can just see how some of the burden is lifted off parents. I mean, we all know the stats that parents in this country, they all love their children, but compared to many other countries, the gap in parent happiness between those with and without children is massive. Right. And it's because it's, I want to say it's institutionally induced, and it doesn't have to be that way. But so this is just the big shift tool that we did here. This was at the Parents as Teachers Conference, but we actually have one online that I would love people to go go on the website. It's under Get Involved. So there's the Big Shift tool, and you can do it electronically, where you can go through questions like, you'd like to take your child to the pediatrician to check on his developmental milestones, but you have no more vacation or parental sick days left.
Yep.
Choose who would be responsible. And they go through the lived reality versus the ideal. And then you can see that, after going through this like 2-minute little exercise, they can reimagine for their own self what they would like society to look like. Because I think that we have to give ourselves permission to imagine a country that really supports us. And I think that we don't believe that it can happen. And let me tell you, the story of Finland. We all think Finland is like this, shining star of family support. It wasn't always.
It wasn't. That's true. Yeah.
And it can be this way. We're made up of, how many, 60 plus million families, and we all struggle with the same thing.
Yep.
So this is just a cute little, go onto the website. It's super fun. And then we also have a forthcoming social impact campaign that is around the book. Look, I have to tell you, I am, my team and I, we put our heart and soul in this. We're going to put it out to the world. We really, we want it to be used as a resource for everyone. This is not about us. This is not ours. We want it to go out. And as part of it, we've created the social impact campaign with a great group, Matter Unlimited. And it's called, we're sort of taking it takes a village and turning it to it takes a nation, a parent nation. And so trying to widen that frame. So under that is high quality childcare, paid leave, child credits, all the, a living wage for all of us and childcare providers. But I just want to show you this one of the many social media things that people can send out in the world. And this is DJ Pryor, who's partnering with us, but you probably remember his viral video. Oh my gosh, it is just adorable. And so the Matter Unlimited, as part of this larger campaign, have edited it to see this. So I want to share this.
Did you understand it though? No.
What our nation has? Lots of devoted parents. What our nation needs? Better ways to support them. Paid leave for the early days that go too fast. The potential of children depends on support for their parents. It takes a nation, a parent nation.
Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh?
So good.
Oh wait, where did you go? So that's the just one of the part of the social media toolkit, but we would love for people to use it and send it out. And hold on one second.
Okay.
Now I can see you. I lost you.
All right, cool. Good.
So I
Great
just
tech
want to
support.
share what you did with that.
That's great. No, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And yes, I would encourage everyone, head over to that website, parentnation.org, check all of this out. It's all, I think, a much needed campaign. And please make sure that you're getting any questions or comments in there. And so, I wanted to ask, we have actually Joe lobbed in a question, which I think is good. This question about institutions, he says is a really interesting one. And so we've obviously seen kind of institutional decline, I think, sort of across society, right? And so how should advocates for children and parents engage in renewing, rebuilding, and building fresh, strong institutions that we can support children and families with?
Well, I always say when I was writing this book and saying, okay, we know what children need, and this is the support their parents need. As part and parcel to that, I use the term parent in a very broad way. I don't mean just biologic parents. I mean early child care providers. I mean pediatrician. I mean healthcare. I mean, all of these institutions that also touch and support children and families. So, yes, I mean, in a parent nation, we would, provide greater funding to childcare providers so that they can have a living wage and provide high quality childcare. We would provide, reimbursement for pediatricians to spend time giving anticipatory guidance to parents and families of young children, really all children, so that they can nurture the next generation. So in that theory of change, a parent nation does support the renewal of all these institutions supporting families. So.
Makes sense to me. Yeah. And I think I would add too, right? Like we have to reconsider like the degree to which the existing institutions are sort of family first. So again, I'll bring up childcare one more time, right? Like the current childcare subsidy system is extremely burdensome for parents, right? Even though that is technically a form of a public support that exists, it is very difficult to acquire. It's extremely regulatorily, sort of it's a labyrinth of forms, and you have to constantly be reporting the right. It's designed, and so we think about exactly. So when I think about the rebuilding strong institutions like Joe's talking about, I think it's also like asking the question, like to what extent do the institutions that we even have now, do they actually serve parents well? And if not, how do we change, the laws and the policies that are governing them? And for the ones that don't exist yet, how do we build them in such a way that they put families first? And, I think that leads me into a question. I think we'd be remiss not to bring up that obviously many of the sort of anti-family policies or lack of pro-family policies have pretty deep intersections with historical and systemic racism, right? Like we know part of the reason childcare system doesn't work real well is because it was designed very much to keep predominantly Black mothers from having support for very long, right? And so that's in its DNA. So as you were researching this book, as you think about this, like how do we, and thinking about sort of the racial moment that we've been in, how has that come up for you? Any thoughts on that question?
No, so many. So many of the families that we work with at TMW that are not just people who have used our programs, but are supporters and colleagues and friends are part of this book. And, I tell this, I'll tell you a couple of stories
Please.
from the book. So, Kiana was a woman, or is a woman, who was part of our TMW home visiting program. So I met many of these families through the programs that we were working. And Kiana and her son were part of the program. And as part of the program, they, how do we say it? They used something called the Lena, which was just this, it's almost like a language Fitbit, just as part of the program. And she would tell us, look, I can't use it on Sundays because that's when I'm go and visit Mike Yon's dad, Michael, and who's incarcerated. And as I learned more and more, Michael was, the story told too often, where he was incarcerated for the first 5 years of his son's life on false murder charges. He was incarcerated for 5 years awaiting trial. Okay. It wasn't even that he was incarcerated and they got it wrong or it was a miscarriage of justice. He was waiting for his trial. So for the first 5 years, which we know are some of the most critical years, the carceral state prevented Mike Yon from having his father, which is obscene. And I was lucky enough Kiana is a force of nature. And just so you know, Mike Yon is incredible. He's now in first grade, like reading, above grade level. And TMW had nothing to do with it. It was Kiana who was a force of nature. But why should Kiana, who wanted to be with her partner, be separated because of that? And Michael, who I got to meet literally a week after he was finally released, is just an amazing human being. And you can hear his story. I mean, we talk about the American dream, right, in this country. But, what does a dream mean when when your freedom is taken from you, when you are prevented? One of the ideas that I wanted to put out there that doesn't seem to resonate as much, but I'm going to say it to you, is I view healthy human brain development as a fundamental human right, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know you're reading Catherine's book right now, the Genetic Lottery, which we are all born with different genes, no doubt. We'll never, get a Nobel Prize in economics, that's for sure. But we are all given our own promise.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens so often that, and the story that stories that you see in this book is that society gets in the way of children reaching the promise of their promise, and parents being given the opportunity to allow them that promise. That's all that parents want.
Yeah.
Right. And here, Michael, because of a carceral state, was prevented from that. And so I connected Michael, because let's face it, with an incredible law firm, a civil rights law firm, who took it, and thankfully it's looking good. But I actually wanted them to take a case for Mikey on too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what? Those first 5 years, we know the neuroscience says. We know the neuroscience says your brain will never be as receptive. And look, he's doing great. And but why should he have been deprived of one of his brain builders? Right. I think that's anyway. So I wanted, healthy brain development to being fundamental human right up there with the Declaration of Independence. But
I think that is, I actually think that is a really provocative idea that needs to be more in out there, because you're right. Like we talk a lot about, the right to education, right? We talk about, this idea of like the American dream, as you mentioned, but if that is part of it, and we, like you say, for reasons that are, very much based in racism, classism, that those opportunities are pulled away. I mean, you mentioned the genetic lottery. One of the studies in there that stood out to me is that you look at sort of the even the genetic expression of children who grow up in poverty versus children who grow up more affluent. The children who grow up in poverty actually have their genetic expression suppressed. You can't see it as much because the sort of overwhelm of this poverty that they're growing up in, that in many cases they have been and their families have been forced into, right, by redlining and a million other racist policies. So no, that's now on board.
Make me so. I mean, seriously, because if you had that, so the book morphed, obviously, like we need a parent lobby, ARP, but if we put as our societal North Star, right, the healthy brain development for all children, that this is a fundamental right, that you have access to your own promise. It puts everything into line, right? It's, everybody thinks of this. I'll tell you one thing that drives me nuts. Everybody thinks about early childhood as just like, oh, this little kid thing. And let's face it, how much do we really care about our kids in this country? But the truth is that when you put that in line, when you put that as the North Star, everything becomes clear. Because in a parent nation, right, everyone has a living wage. Everyone has freedom from fear and protection from toxic stress, all the things, this is a gender issue. This is a civil rights issue. This is a labor issue. This is good for the bottom line. This is good for the economy. I mean, have you seen the size of our GDP? I want to get the picture up. We outsize every country, even we're bigger than China, right? We are giant. How is it that we care so little and invest so little in our future? It's like so incredibly short-sighted. Sorry, Elliot,
No, I preach. Like this is the passion, comes through. And I think we need to, you're right. Like we can often get understandably sort of like pigeonholed into talking about one policy issue, or one age band, or, but the fact is when you draw back to these bigger philosophical questions, and I'll actually draw this back all the way to the beginning of our conversation, like that can unite us, right? I'm pretty sure, like I can think of, conservative family members who live in rural parts of, the West, and me here, very progressive, sitting in an urban center in the East. And like, I'm pretty sure if you talk about like every child should have the opportunity to have their inborn promise to meet that sort of self-defined aspirations, like I would be hard pressed to find anyone who would disagree with that. So, I think you're right. Sort of building a new North Star around human flourishing is one reason I appreciate the Capita is hosting. This is very much their North Star as well. Like we have to have these bigger conversations we have to talk. But what I really appreciate what you're doing is that you're also saying, like, that's the philosophy and here's how it plays out in practice. Like, here's the real human consequence of that. So, I think that's spot on.
Well, two things. I don't know if you remember actually one of the first chapters in the book. I think it's chapter 2. I talk about the neuroscience, and I actually tell the story of a young girl born with half a brain. And it's one of my, it was in a journal article, but one of my colleagues actually took care of her. And she was born with half a brain. And you would imagine someone born with half a brain would, be vegetative or, not very, not have success in the typical academic way. This child ended up, reading above grade level. She last time I heard was going off to college. Why? Because the brain is a miraculous thing, right? It comes out absolutely underdeveloped. And so, parts of the existing brain, helped the other part of the brain. And, it was because of the nourishment and the early intervention, right? This child thrived. And, I think that we forget, we get so into the weeds that really every child has huge potential, most children are born with full brains, have huge capacity, don't need early intervention. We just need to not get in the way of families being able to provide the nourishment, or caregivers giving the nourishment to those children. So.
Yeah, no, yes, absolutely. We have a few 10 or so minutes left. So again, any questions that you have, please drop those into the YouTube channel. We'll get them over here. Dana, I'm curious, what surprised you the most as you were working through this book?
What surprised me? I think what didn't surprise me is the universal love of parents for their children, and the fact that they will go to the ends of the earth for their children. Look, I'm a physician. I've been taking care of kids for 1,000 years. So I already know that parents will do everything. So that wasn't surprising. I think two things were surprising. Just this incredibly long history of not supporting parents and families, and how every step forward seemed to roll back. So, I talk about, the Shepherd-Towner Act that, you probably know about, where, which was basically infant and maternal health that dramatically decreased infant mortality.
Yep.
And the fact that, the only reason it passed was because women's suffrage, women got the right to vote. So politicians were worried that they were going to be voted out for office. They passed it. It did good. And then they realized, oh, women aren't going to vote as a bloc. You know what? Let's axe it. We'll give it a year or so more. And then we axed it. And how every step forward, there's step backwards. And we sort of think it's like our cultural norms. I think it's deeper. I mean, I think it's, people don't want to spend the money. They don't care about kids. The only people who really care deeply, not the only, but, parents, caregivers, all, the people listening, they care about kids. And that I became more and more stronger in my belief that a parent lobby, whatever we call it, national associations of parents and caregivers, whatever. And it's like, you don't have to be biologic, is probably the only way we're going to really move things forward and prevent them from rolling back. Because even if, I was thinking when all, BBB was on the table and we thought, oh, yay, we're going to get these things. And I was like, you know what? There's still a need for this book. Why? Because we move things forward and they go backwards. Mm-hmm. And so we do need this unified voice. We need a unified voice that advocates for really what is good for all of us. So I guess the biggest surprise was I became more and more, I believe in the power of talk and interaction. That is what builds a child's brain. That hasn't changed. It's just how we're going to get there has changed a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes, again, a ton of sense to me. And, I think there is some hope, right? You mentioned Finland. I mean, I also mentioned, Canada, right? We just saw them last week, right? They've now basically have universal childcare. And, so there is progress happening. There's no particular reason that it can't happen here. So, I'm totally on board with you there. I think the last question I have for you is, is for everyone listening, for, how can they, so we mentioned the website, right? But like, if they're thinking like, all right, what should I do right now? Like, I'm fired up, like Dana's convinced me, let's go. Like, what are a couple of really practical steps that people can take?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess from the book and the ideas, I want to reinforce we're all working towards this. So this is not, let's get it out of the echo chamber. I mean, I think really the reason I wrote this book, it wasn't for all of us. I have everybody in this book, so everybody's going to see their name. Really what I think we need to do is get it out of the echo chamber, get this out of just little kid stuff. This is the foundation of our country. Go to our website. We have different, if you sign up, we're going to have a social media toolkit. Let's get it out far and wide. Let's be thunderclap. This is, we are at a crossroads. We all know that. It seems like we've been for a while, but we're starting to feel stuck. And we've got to get unstuck. And we all believe, we all know, but it's really only by working together. So that's why, in naming this book, Parent Nation, I was like, what is a name? Because 30 million words, which, had it was a double-edged sword at the same time, people remembered it. Let's say we need to, it takes a name. It doesn't take a village to raise a child. It takes a nation.
Yeah.
The Parent Nation, and it's all of us. So go to the website, email me. Take it on. Look, I'm a surgeon. At the end of the day, I'll probably be, going back to my little operating room and running my center. I just want to see change.
Yeah.
I want grandchildren.
That's another. Yeah, I mean, great. We put grand in parentheses, right? It could be grandparents can get involved in this too, right?
Everybody. Anybody who cares about a child or the future of our country. So.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll echo that. I think get this out, like set this message. Like I said, like anyone you encounter, in daily life, right? Your person who cuts your hair, the person who, is coaching your kids, soccer league, whatever it is, like the person who's teaching yoga, like everyone does need to be involved in. And I will say as well, having had many of these conversations, you would be surprised at how receptive people are, in my experience, when you start talking about this. Because a lot of them, most of us, everyone, if they're not a parent, knows parents or is related to people who are parents, right? Like there really isn't.
Or was a child.
Or was a child, right? 100% of us, in fact, were a child. So, I think that no one's more than a degree of separation from parents. And obviously all of us, benefit from, as you say, like it is the underpinning of everything. So,
Elliot, I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
My dream is that someday your newsletter says the parents are okay. That's my dream.
All right. I love it.
Dream.
The goal. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Dana. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll as I said, parentnation.org. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we talk or and move forward together. So thank you for writing the book. Thank you for that work. Thank you for the work that you do on behalf of children and parents every single day. Really great to talk with you. And thank you to everyone in the audience for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, y'all.